hello to you watching this. Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Liability YouTube channel where I, Bree Cheyenne, mostly talk about unsolved crimes against children, anything from older to newer. Y'all already know I don't like to do too much with the intro, so I'm gonna go ahead and just jump straight into today's case. Between 1976 and 1977, 4 children were abducted, held captive, and later murdered in Oakland County, Michigan. Now this is during a time when it was pretty common for people to just leave their kids outside because they felt safe to do so. But after this, that was really no longer the case. Life was great for these people until it wasn't. The killer, or possibly even killers, is known as the Oakland County Child Killer, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to refer to this person or persons as one singular killer. Now, DNA testing has indirectly implicated 2 suspects, one of which has since died since these murders happened, and the other is serving a life sentence in prison for unrelated crimes against children. From all accounts, Mark Stebbins from Ferndale, Michigan was a normal, lovable 12-year-old boy. He was last seen alive leaving an American Legion Hall on February 15, 1976, after he had spent some time there playing with his brother, who left an hour after he did. Everything went south from there, his brother Michael Stebbins said in a later interview, adding, "It tore my life apart for a long time. It did." Mark had told his mother that he was going to head home at the time that he left to watch a movie, but when he didn't return home by 11 p.m., his mother grew, of course, worried, and she called the police to report him missing. Mark was last seen wearing a blue hooded parka, a pair of blue jeans, black rubber boots, and a red sweatshirt. I also forgot to say this, but if you guys hear a little buzzing in the background, sorry about that. That's a little fan I have going because it's super hot. I have the AC on and I'm still hot, so I have this fan because I need some direct air hitting me. 4 days after Michael was last seen alive, so this is now February 19th, a Southfield, Michigan businessman stumbled across what he thought was at first a mannequin, and in this area he stumbled on it across. It was about 10 miles away from Ferndale, Michigan. Upon a closer inspection of this mannequin, he discovered it was actually the corpse of Mark Stebbins, who was still dressed in the same clothes he was last seen in. He was found laying gently in a sleeping position. An autopsy revealed that Mark had been sexually assaulted before being either strangled or smothered to death. It was also evident that the killer had thoroughly cleaned Mark and his clothes, more than likely as a forensic countermeasure. There were a couple mistakes made on the police's end, such as Mark's body being sent directly to the Southfield Police Department, which means that the coroner did not get the chance to examine his body in the way that it was found at the crime scene. They also removed his clothes when he got to the police station, so this destroyed any potential evidence that the coroner may have been able to collect at the time. Now this was before DNA testing was really prevalent, so maybe he had been able to collect for future testing. An eyewitness did come forward to tell police about some information involving Mark's disposal. They said that his body would have been disposed of in the parking lot sometime before 9:30 a.m. After Mark's funeral, a card from his service was found where his body was found, indicating that the killer may have attended his funeral. Jill Robinson of Royal Oak, Michigan was also only 12 years old when she was murdered. Jill went missing after packing a backpack and running away from home following an argument with her mother, which was later revealed to be over household chores. This was on December 22nd, 1976. The day after Jill ran away, her bike was located behind a store in Royal Oak, Michigan. On the day after Christmas, Jill's fully clothed, snow-covered corpse was found laying neatly along Interstate 75 in Troy, Michigan. Again, no more than 10 miles from where she resided. She too had been thoroughly cleaned as well as her clothes, just like Mark Stebbins, the previous victim. Investigators located Jill's backpack and they determined that all of her personal items were still in there, so robbery was not a motive, although, I mean, yeah, I would assume so. I don't really know what a 12-year-old, what much of value a 12-year-old would have. This part is a little gruesome, so prepare your ears. For her cause of death, it was determined to be a single gunshot wound. The killer had blown off half of her face with a 12-gauge shotgun while she was laying on her back. And boldly enough, the killer even placed her body within sight of the Troy Police Department. An eyewitness supposedly came forward to tell police that they had seen a blue Pontiac Le Mans hopefully I pronounced that right, had been parked where Jill's body was eventually discovered around 4:30 a.m. that morning. And from what I read, this was a lead that apparently police didn't follow too much up on. Despite Jill being found close to where Mark was found, their deaths were not linked at this time because it had happened months apart and their causes of death had varied so much. In addition, Mark had been sexually assaulted while Jill had not. Now, it's very rare that serial sexual offenders will cross genders and ages. They usually have a type. One theory about why Jill was shot and Mark was not was that she actually was strangled first, but when the killer realized that when he went to go dump her body, he realized that she actually wasn't dead, and thus he shot her. Now, it wasn't until the next victim that police started connecting all these murders, and this murder happened much sooner than the 10-month time span between Jill and Mark's murder. Kristine Mihelich, a resident of Berkeley, Michigan, would be the youngest victim of the Oakland County Child Killer, being only 10 years old when she was murdered. Before she went missing on January 2nd, 1977, eyewitnesses reported seeing her around 3 p.m. at a 7-Eleven store. Kristine reportedly bought a magazine and left the store. Her mother wouldn't report her missing until 6 p.m., so sometime between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m., this girl was abducted. During the 19 days that Kristine was missing, her mother got on local television and pleaded for Kristine's safe release. In an act of generosity, the family's neighbors were able to raise $17,000 for a ransom payment should they so need to use it for Kristine's release. Unfortunately, the hope to find Kristine alive was crushed on January 21st, 1977, when her snow-covered corpse was discovered by a USPS worker in Franklin Village, Michigan. Kristine died as a result of being smothered to death, and she was, like the other victims, left fully clothed in the snow. She was also found buried quite gently, for lack of a better word, like the other victims again. Her hands were found placed over her chest. Her official autopsy also revealed that Kristine was killed less than 24 hours before the discovery of her body, meaning the killer not only struck again in less than a month this time, but they also held Kristine longer than the other two victims. It's unclear whether she was officially sexually assaulted or not, because her original autopsy did describe semen being found in her body, but this claim was later dismissed by state police. Despite the victims' varying causes of deaths, as well as their captivity periods, the way their bodies were found, as well as the fact that they were all from Oakland County, was enough for investigators to determine that there was a connection between them. All of the bodies also had this same white animal hair on them, presumably from a dog. Reports about this serial killer were released to the public. Meanwhile, Michigan State Police led a group of law enforcement officials from 13 different communities to form a task force dedicated to this investigation. Unsurprisingly, this news of a child serial killer sent the southeastern part of Michigan into mass hysteria. On one incident, a truck driver stopped and assaulted a man that he just saw talking to two kids. That's it, he just saw them talking to them. And it turned out that this man, he was simply a car tire salesman. He was like literally just stopping the kids to ask them for directions, and he got beat up. He didn't even know who the Oakland County Child Killer was. The growing search into this killer was not enough to deter them, and they struck again 2 months later. The last confirmed victim of the Oakland County Child Killer was 11-year-old Timothy King of Birmingham, Michigan. On March 16th, 1977, Timothy was home alone that day because his sister was out on a date, his older brothers were busy, and his parents were also out on a date. His mother, Marion King, later told the press that Timothy was left home alone sometimes, and that night that they were gone, they hadn't planned to be gone for very long. At around 7:30 p.m., Timothy left his house with his skateboard to go to a nearby convenience store to buy some candy, and he was never seen again. Police immediately suspected that this was the work of the Oakland County Child Killer and wasted no time starting to search for Timothy and get the news out about his disappearance. They conducted a search of the entire Metro Detroit area. During the night of Timothy's abduction, his older brother Christopher was walking around the neighborhood with a bat, hoping to catch and do some things to whoever abducted his brother. 2 eyewitnesses would report to police that about an hour after 7:30, they saw Timothy walking out of the store and into the parking lot, From there, they said he was approached by a man with long, shaggy hair, and both he and Timothy got into this man's car. One witness described this car as a blue AMC Gremlin with a white stripe across the side. The witnesses were able to help police develop a composite sketch, which was released to the public, and police also conducted interviews with everybody in the area that owned a Gremlin. Timothy's body would eventually be discovered 6 days later on March 22nd in the snow on the side of the road in the town of Livonia, which was about 20 miles from Birmingham where he lived. His autopsy revealed he had been sexually assaulted with a foreign object, and he was suffocated just 6 hours prior to the discovery of his body. The killer had neatly washed and pressed his clothes like the other victims, and unlike the other victims, he fed him fried chicken. Now, this latter fact chillingly revealed that whoever this killer was, he was keeping up with the news reportings on the case because Timothy's mother came out to the media and asked whoever abducted Timothy to feed him Kentucky Fried Chicken because it was his favorite food. While the Oakland County Child Killer has only been officially linked to those 4 murders, there are some others that some suspect they may have been involved in. Years before the first confirmed victim of the Oakland County Child Killer, 16-year-old Donna Sarah from Ray Township was abducted in 1972. Standing only at 5'3" and weighing around 110 pounds, Donna was last seen alive on September 29th, 1972, after she had ditched the day around 1:05 p.m. She did school because she wanted to presumably hitch a ride to the beach. Now, hitchhiking back then was more common, especially for teens that were trying to get from place to place. Donna would hitch a ride with a man, never to be seen again. She was held captive for a few days before her body was discovered on October 20th, 1972. Now, reportedly half the case file on Donna is either missing or incomplete, but some people do consider her to be one of the Oakland County Child Killer victims because her abduction and her murder fit his MO. 14-year-old Jane Allen disappeared on August 8th, 1976 while she was hitchhiking between Pontiac and Royal Oak, Michigan. 3 days later, her body was found floating in the Miami River in Miamisburg, Ohio. She, like Mark, had been bound at her wrist with torn strips from a t-shirt. The state of Jane's body made it unable to determine whether or not she had been sexually assaulted, but they were able to determine that she died before she went into the water. The suspected cause of death for Jane was carbon monoxide poisoning, and as you can tell, very different from the other victims. Kimberly King, no relation to Timothy King, came from the suburbs of the greater Detroit area, and like many of the other victims, she was just 12 years old when she went missing on September 16th, 1979, after she was last seen alive walking around in her neighborhood of Warren, Michigan. The last person to see Kimberly alive was her friend Annie, who told police that on September 16th, she had slipped out the window of her bedroom just sometime before midnight. Kimberly then called her sister Connie, who lived in Pontiac, from a payphone. Her body was never found despite a letter being sent to the Rossville police in Rossville, Michigan in 1983. In this letter, details of where Kimberly's body was allegedly located were included. Another tantalizing clue is the fact that Kimberly's father was close friends with 2 of the primary suspects in this case, Archibald Sloan and David Norberg. I'm going to talk about them in a few minutes. 13 years after the first murder, another occurred in October of 1989 that could possibly be linked to the Oakland County Child Killer. 10-year-old Amy M., I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce her last name because I'm going to butcher it. 10-year-old Amy M. was abducted on October 27th from the Bay Village Shopping Center after arranging a meetup with an unidentified man. It wouldn't be until several months later, on February 8th, 1990, that Amy's body was found laying along a road in Ashland County, Ohio. The Cuyahoga County coroner determined that Amy's kidnapper had killed her and disposed of her body not long after she was last seen alive on October 27th. Blood that was found in her underwear indicated that she was likely sexually assaulted. In November of 2006, now almost 2 decades after Amy's murder, Ohio police and the FBI revealed that Amy, along with a few other girls, had received some strange calls prior to Amy's death. This unidentified man, who called several girls between the summer and fall of 1989, told Amy that he was a co-worker of her mother's, and he asked her to meet up with him because he wanted to arrange something. He wanted to arrange to give her a gift or something like that because her mother had recently received a promotion. The assembled task force investigated over 18,000 leads, which resulted in about 24 arrests on unrelated charges after they discovered a multi-state child pornography ring. In regards to the Oakland County Child Killer, though, they unfortunately did not make much headway and disbanded in 1978, turning the investigation over to the state police. Based on a composed profile, investigators believe that this person had a job that granted him a pretty lax schedule and freedom of movement to be able to do all these things. They also believed he had a job that would allow children to easily trust him, such as a teacher or a doctor. They also would have had the means to hold the children captive without arousing the suspicion of anybody nearby. Considering all of the children were dumped in Oakland County, it's likely that this person is very familiar with that area, probably a resident. A few weeks after the death of Timothy King, a local psychiatrist, Bruce L. Donto, received a letter from a man making some claims. At the time, Donto was assisting with the investigation and he was a part of the task force while it was still together. It's believed that the killer may have been trying to make contact with this Bruce Donto after the disposal of Kristine's body, because her body was found on a road named Bruce Lane, and this Bruce Donto, his middle name was Lee, so the BL and the BL would have lined up. The letter was written by an anonymous man who called himself Alan, and he said he was a sadomasochist slave to another man named Frank, who he claimed was the Oakland County Child Killer. Alan wrote that they had both served in the Vietnam War, and Frank was traumatized for having killed children. Now, I'm not entirely sure if they meant he killed children in the war or he was traumatized from killing the children from this case. Alan expressed fear and remorse in his letter, admitting that he and Frank would drive around trying to find boys to kill. However, now he wanted to be done with this, and he was too afraid to turn Frank in fear that he might harm him. So he asked for Donto's help. Alan instructed Donto to print the code words, "Weather Bureau says trees to bloom in 3 weeks," in that Sunday's Free Press edition. He also offered to provide photographic evidence to prove his claims in exchange for immunity. Alan and Donto had arranged to meet at a bar, but this Alan never showed up and he was never heard from again. A man named David Norberg, who was a previous auto worker, came onto the police's radar after his wife was going through his belongings following his death from a car accident in 1981. One of these items was a silver cross with the name Kristine on it, which bore a strong resemblance to the one victim Kristine owned. Another item included a St. Christopher medal, again similar to one of the victims, Timothy King, something he owned but he wasn't found with. Norberg's wife told investigators how he would tie her up, which led to him being a strong suspect in the death of Jane Allen. She divulged how he would rip bits of cloth from a t-shirt and use that to tie her up, very similar to the method that was used on Jane, who was found with her hands tied behind her back. Investigators also suspected him in the death of Kimberly King. At the time she disappeared, he lived just like 2 streets away from her, and shortly after her disappearance, he left. In 1999, law enforcement officials decided to exhume David Norberg's body. To their disappointment, a hair found on Timothy King was not a match for him. Despite this, investigators refused to rule him out completely because they weren't even sure that this hair came from Timothy's killer. Even if Norberg isn't the Oakland County Child Killer, he is still a prime suspect in Jane Allen's murder and Kimberly King's disappearance. In 2005, a prisoner named Richard Lawson was being questioned for unrelated crimes when he gave police the name Theodore Lamborghini as the Oakland County Child Killer. Lawson admitted that in the 1970s, he was a part of a group of pedophiles, and amongst them were 2 wealthier men named Bob Moore and Ted Lamborghini, who Lawson knew as Ted Orr. Lamborghini and Moore would entice and groom these often financially struggling young boys with offers of money and food before they took them to a separate location and abused them. Sounds very similar to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Lawson told investigators that Lamborghini would sometimes venture out into wealthier areas such as Royal Oak and Birmingham. Investigators decided to investigate these claims further, where they discovered Bob Moore had already died in his home from cardiac arrest, and his pit bulls ate his remains before he was found. Ted Lamborghini, however, was very much still alive and was arrested. In March of 2007, police told a Detroit news station that Ted Lamborghini was now their top suspect in the case of the Oakland County Child Killer. Lamborghini would confess to being a pedophile, pleading guilty to 15 sex-related counts involving young boys, but he denied that he was a murderer. He even agreed to take a polygraph to prove his innocence. Out of the 300 plus polygraph tests that were administered for this case, Ted Lamborghini was the first one to fail. He was offered a reduced sentence as well as an identity change and a prison transfer if he agreed to give up information on the case, which he refused to do because he claimed he was innocent. There have been some rumors that Lamborghini admitted to previously abusing some of the victims, but never murdering them. Lamborghini was taken to court by Mark Stebbins' family in October of 2007, who filed for wrongful death, and they were seeking $25,000 in damages. Now, the family's lawyer did come out to say that this case wasn't really about the money. They just did it, they just used this as a way to get more information on Lamborghini. The case ended up being dismissed. In 2009, new evidence led investigators to two new suspects. The evidence being found was a hair on Kristine, Timothy, and Mark's body. The first suspect's name was Archibald Sloan, who at this time he's now in his 70s, but he was a child molester that victimized young boys in his neighborhood of Southfield, Michigan. In 1961, he was paroled after serving a 2.5-year sentence for gross indecency between males. Between the 1970s and early 80s, he was found guilty in 3 other sex-related crimes, including charges of sodomy and corrupting the morals of a minor. He became a person of interest in 2012 after a hair found in his 1966 Pontiac Bonneville matched hairs that were found on Timothy and Mark's body, although the hair did not belong to Sloan himself. Sloan did own 2 other cars, so possibly he loaned one to a friend. He was a suspect early on in the investigation, so the hair that they eventually tested, they had collected earlier and stored for future testing. A witness claimed to have seen Timothy King being abducted by 2 men, one of them who was described as being in his late 20s, and the other was described as bearing a strong resemblance to well-known serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who was allegedly in Michigan at this time. However, Gacy's DNA was tested with the DNA on file and it was not a match. In 2019, a reporter named Heather Cataldo reported in a documentary titled Children of the Snow, claiming that Sloan had allegedly failed a polygraph test in relation to the Oakland County Child Killer sometime between 2010 and 2012. Sloan is currently serving a life sentence for a 1983 sexual assault of a 10-year-old boy, and despite offers from investigators, including being released from prison, he has not volunteered any information in relation to the Oakland County Child Killer. The identity of the hair remains unknown. In 2006, Timothy King's family received a phone call from someone who was a neighbor and previous friend of Timothy King. Patrick Coffey, who was now an attorney, said that he was largely inspired to become an attorney because of what happened to Timothy. He informed the Kings of a conference he had recently attended where he was involved in a revealing conversation with a Lawrence Wasser, who was a polygraph examiner from Southfield, Michigan. According to Coffey, Wasser knew the identity of the Oakland County Child Killer because this person allegedly accidentally let it slip while they were being administered a polygraph test for an unrelated murder 30 years earlier. Wasser did not tell Coffey the name of this man, only saying that he and his attorney were now dead. When Wasser was contacted by the police, he denied this conversation ever taking place. The King family did reach out to investigators with this new information, and months later, they received a call from investigators asking if they were familiar with anyone with the last name Bush. Further research by the King family after obtaining the police file revealed the dark past of a known pedophile who had been a previous suspect back in 1977. His name was Christopher Bush. Christopher Bush came from a pretty wealthy family and was the son of a high-level executive that was working for General Motors. He was also known to have repeatedly been arrested for sexual encounters involving children. In 1977, Bush's friend and fellow pedophile Gregory Green was arrested. During questioning, Green told officers that he and Bush often fantasized together about capturing a young boy and holding them captive. He also revealed a shocking allegation that Bush was the one responsible for Mark Stebbins' murder. Bush and another associate, Douglas Bennett, were later arrested for multiple charges involving sexual contact with minors. While Bennett admitted to the charges he was arrested for, he denied any involvement in whatever Green and Bush were up to. Green and Bush were then interviewed by Michigan State Police, who decided to administer them polygraph tests in relation to the Oakland County Child Killer. They both passed and they were cleared of any involvement in January of 1977. Now the weird thing is that Green was given a life sentence for his crimes, but Bush, despite abusing the same child that Green did, he was able to get his charges reduced to molesting a minor and only received probation. But like I said, he came from a prominent family. Less than 2 years later, Christopher Bush, they say he committed suicide in November of 1978, but the details of it are a little sketchy. According to his family, Bush had killed himself as a result of his depression due to his ongoing legal battles. I mean, not like he did it to himself or anything. Now they say he killed himself with a gun, but his room supposedly had no signs of blood splatter and there was no gunshot residue found on him. Bush's body was found wrapped neatly under his sheets, weird already right there, and they found 4 shell casings in his room, despite his cause of death being a single gunshot wound between his eyes. 2 other items of interest were found in the room, including a bloodstained ligature, and the second being a hand-drawn picture of a child, which some say bears a strong resemblance to Mark Stebbins. Coincidentally enough, after the death of Christopher Bush, no more murders that were attributed to the Oakland County Child Killer occurred. It's also interesting to note that the task force that was assembled for this case disbanded in December of 1978, less than a month after Christopher's death. The second suspect I was referring to earlier in relation to the DNA evidence is James Vincent Gunnels. In 1977, Gunnels was known to have kept company with 2 other suspects in this case, Christopher Bush and Gregory Green. Gunnels himself was actually only 15 at the time he knew them and suffered abuse at their hands. The hair that was recovered from Kristine's body was determined to be a mitochondrial match for Gunnels, and although not exact, it was definitely a huge leap forward from where they were before. When questioned about this new evidence, James Gunnels, who was now 47 at this time, denied ever knowing Kristine and had no explanation as to how his DNA would have ended up on her body. Gunnels ended up also taking a polygraph test in relation to the case, and there were 3 questions that he was asked that raised some suspicions because of his answers. The 3 questions he was asked were if he participated in Kristine's killing, if he knew for certain who had killed her, and finally, if he had any physical contact with the victim. Now, according to the examiner that administered this test, Gunnels had completely failed. Gunnels continued to proclaim his innocence, and he was never arrested in relation to the Oakland County Child Killer case, and now he's not considered a suspect anymore for reasons unknown. I'm about to keep this short, but basically I went to finish editing this video and realized my outro was missing. So I just want to say that was the end of the case. That's all I had to share with you guys. And of course, I always share these with the intention of it hopefully reaching the right person that can help get it solved. So if you are that person, please contact investigators at 833-784-9425. And of course, that information is always going to be in the description box too. That's all I have to say, so thank you so much if you stuck with me all the way until the end. Hope to catch you back for my next one. Bye, y'all.